Okay, everybody, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here. I have, through fortuitousness on the algorithms of LinkedIn, discovered this great mind of the endocannabinoid system in cannabis. We had a chance to speak, several weeks ago, and man, it's usually I don't feel that there are folks that have a lot more depth in a lot of areas on this system than I do. But this is Chip Paul, and he took me to some new places the last time we talked. So we're going to go to some new places today. I would imagine that the call will be technical, sometimes very technical, and I will do my best to rewind, to fill in, but I think that if we aren't technical, you're going to miss some of the nuance of this gentleman. What I love about him is he has a mathematical mind, and he approaches this system largely through the language, the universal language of mathematics, and is not a conventional thinker in terms of how you would think of as a classically trained uh, medical doctor or PhD chemist. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Chip Paul. Chip, welcome. Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you're doing, and we'll leave room at the end also for how folks can find you, but you can mention that as well.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Dr. Felice. And Dr. Jake, I hope I can call you Dr. Jake. I just feel like you're
Please call
Dr.
me Dr. Jake.
Okay,
Yes.
because you just seem like Dr. Jake to me. But thank you, first of all, so much for having me on. And it's always exciting to talk about the endocannabinoid system. It's something that I've really spent the last 10 years or so of my life devoted to understanding and to trying to pick apart and to trying to understand kind of the deeper meaning behind it. But to your question, what I do every day, so I'm a product formulator, I'm a drug developer, and I'm looking for a good situation to go land at. So right now, but at day to day, we run a clinic, so we help people. I hold a patent around what we do with natural products. So I hold U.S. patent number 10,646,535. It's about manipulating the endocannabinoid system with non-cannabis plants, and
Oh, I love this topic.
that's an issued patent. So, we have a line of supplements that we call True Medics. So you can, find those online at truemedics.com. And those are patent backed, and kind of we formulate. But we've got some things in there that rise to the level, let's say, or close to the level of drugs that we can, walk up something like botanical new drug. So we're excited to go do that. I'm really excited to, go make drugs somewhere. So I think it's time to do that.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I think that as we are just beginning to dip our toes into this endocannabinoid system, which is so vast, it's the largest receptor system in the mammalian nervous system, bar none. I think what I'd like to just off the bat say is that I think that this system has a marketing problem, and it needs to hire a PR firm, but it's just a little, not so little old receptor system, because when we say the word ECS or endocannabinoid system, everybody thinks of cannabis, but it is a homeostatic regulatory system, which I'm sure we'll get into. And not only does it respond to cannabis, but our body has its own endocannabinoids that we make on demand to work this receptor system. Plus, it responds to exercise, diet, especially dietary lipids, acupuncture rather, chiropractic type manipulations. There's even a study on singing in women. So it is a broad, what I love about it, Chip, from a natural health perspective, is that it gives me tools to talk about the benefits of all of these other health modalities. So tell me a little bit about these non-cannabis plants that are making cannabinoids.
Okay. Well, let's talk about a little bit more in depth about the system because I
Oh,
love this
sure.
conversation. I think so. To your point, and I've been speaking about this system, in conferences and all kinds of stuff since like 2016. So I can see it in people's eyes. As soon as I say endocannabinoid system, Chip's going to try to sell me cannabis or sell me a CBD product or something.
This
It's like,
guy's going to start talking about weed.
exactly. And that is, so some facts. So let's just sort of get this out there. So cannabis will supplement your endocannabinoid system. It is not the natural way you feed your endocannabinoid system. The natural way we feed our endocannabinoid system is through dietary fats. Okay. And that's not very sexy or exciting, but that's the truth. And I agree with you that we have a PR problem with the endocannabinoid system. We really should call it the ethanol amine system or the fatty acid amine system, because that's really what it's doing. So literally, as we eat dietary fats, and there are every kind of fat you can stick on a triglyceride. I think there's 9 of them, but they'll make, a myriad of endocannabinoids. But as soon as they hit our intestinal lumen, they form with literally star stuff called ethanol amine. And ethanol amine will combine with those fats to form different endocannabinoids for each different type of fat you can stick on a triglyceride. Through that process and through our vagal afferent nerve and communication with our hypothalamus hippocampus, we understand what we just ate. And we understand whether it is sufficient or not nutritionally to satisfy ourselves. And again, it's all about the fats and
Love it.
amino.
Love it. Let me fill in a little bit because I want you to go, but I'm going to backfill a little bit. So you mentioned the intestinal lumen and the vagus nerve. So I'm going to just backfill that a little bit. And something that a lot of folks may or may not know is that we have in our colon, in our digestive tract, friendly bacteria, sometimes known as probiotics or healthy microbiotica. But these healthy bacteria that provide benefits to us. And these bacteria will take some of the contents of our food and make a lot of these short chain fatty acid molecules. One of the things that they make, and your chemistry is probably much better than mine. My chemistry is not bad, by the way. But anyway, the gut bugs make over 80% of our body's serotonin, and these bugs have cannabinoid receptors on them, and they talk through the lumen, through that very thin endothelial layer, not only to our immune system to help regulate inflammation, but they have a direct line straight into the brain through something called the vagus nerve, the 10th cranial nerve.
Yep.
And what's really cool about information systems is that if it is a circular or unidirectional information system, it can process information in one way, but this is a bidirectional system. So our body talks to the bugs, the friendly bugs, with cannabinoid via the cannabinoid system, and they talk back. And one of the things that our healthy bugs do is they really, as I mentioned, help control inflammation and also the neurotransmission of serotonin, which is a very important molecule for us to
Mhm.
feel good. Great point. I'm going to turn you loose and let you go again, and feel free to run with this. This is fascinating.
Yeah, so I may, say some somewhat controversial statements here. So we'll see. But I have a different thought on this. So again, to go back to kind of how things work. So as we eat these dietary fats, again, we understand what we're eating and we understand where we're deficient. Okay. And through that deficiency, that is where we're allowed to develop a biome. And the purpose of that biome really is to offset any nutritional deficiencies that we have through our diet, right? But here's the thing that, and again, this is sort of theoretical. I mean, you're not going to really find any research on this, but this is why we talk. This is why it's fun, right? So in my mind, again, if I can hit those fats just right, you don't need a biome. Okay. And again, the biome right now, it definitely helps us. It helps us in some ways. It gets, modulates our immune system, modulates serotonin. But again, those guys are alive. Those guys have you know, life force. They can, you know, gee, I think a donut would be good right now. Here's a bunch of dopamine and serotonin. Go eat that donut, Chip. Right. So they have the ability to do that.
Yes.
And again, we can always override that, I think, you know, with will, just that's the way we're kind of spiritually and physically constructed. But I don't know that, and I can, again, I don't want to get into intellectual property, let's say on the podcast, but I can kind of prove to you that that biome, certainly there's ample evidence, and it's everywhere in science that that biome helps us, that it's commiserate, that it lives with us, that it somehow helps us. I'm on the opposite side of that spectrum. I think the way that we eat right now, we have to have a biome. It's necessary, but I don't think you have to have a biome. I think we can build a diet such that it feeds all these processes, the endocannabinoid processes and our nutrient seeking processes, where we don't need a biome. And I think at that point, we're an evolved being. Honestly, I think we evolved past being a mammal. So
Oh,
yeah,
cool, cool,
now
cool.
now we're
We
down.
can now
Yeah,
we're down the rabbit hole. Okay,
yes, sir.
just for point of agreement, because I'm not going to push back on the biome thing, but what I can say is where I definitely feel that we are in agreement, or maybe, um, is in what we think of as the unhealthy gut bacteria,
Yeah,
which where you mentioned me eating a donut, that donut goes in and the unhealthy bacteria will right away secrete their chemicals that make me feel temporarily good when I'm eating the crappy food for my body, but it's good for them. And then if there's too many of those negative bacteria, when they're not being fed, just like your kitty cat will complain to you that I'm a poor starving kitty, they will secrete chemicals that make us feel bad when we eat food that is good for us. So, but anyway, let's go. I love these rabbit holes. Let's go down these rabbit holes. And I'm sure I don't have a question yet, so keep going, and we'll just riff back and forth here.
right now we've got this, and so we're sort of talking biome. So we've got this sort of balance between, if you look at your biome and kind of how to make it healthy the way that it is right now. So it's sort of this balance between colostrum and Firmicutes, right? And that, you know, if your stool is loose, you're going to be too heavy in one and not enough in the other. And, you know, if your stool's too firm, you're going to be that way. But those two guys balance right now. But I will tell you this and again, this is, I won't get into intellectual property, but I'll get close. We make bile acids. Okay, so everybody makes bile acids. You make bile acids in a different way than a mouse does. So, you know, if you're reading research studies like I do all the time, you need to know that before you start reading a bunch of mice and rat studies. But we make bile acid. And so when we make bile acid, that's something called cholic acid. Cholic acid. And cholic acid can get modified. And when you read this in the literature, it's like, oh yeah, this is just the way stuff works. Sorry, the way that stuff works. And you know, it's just accept this because this is the way that it is. But it talks about how you'll make secondary bile acids through your biome. Okay. But
Oh,
I
okay.
will tell you that some of those secondary bile acids are not helping you.
Huh,
Let's say they're favoring the bugs in your biome over you. And, you know, that's what bugs do. They modify our processes so they can stay alive and so that they can, you know, flourish and thrive. But I will tell you, there's things in that biome right now that we think that are helping us that are not helping us, that are adding to our obesity and weight loss problems, adding to our sensitivity to pain problems, things like that. So,
fascinating,
yeah.
fascinating.
And you know this too, you know, and to your point about, and so that you guys can differentiate, if you're not in the middle of this, it's hard to differentiate. So there's stuff that we think of as our biome that's supposed to be commiserate and good bacteria. That's what we're mainly talking about right now. I'm kind of saying there may be some bad stuff in there that we don't really recognize yet. And you know, there's good and bad with that biome, let's say, but there absolutely is this class of guys over here, these bugs called pathogens. And these pathogens could be parasitic, could be viruses, could be bacteria, could be funguses. But this class of pathogens hurts us and is the cause for most disease right now. And I'll give you a quick example, real quick. because you'll love this one. You know about Toxoplasma gondii, I'm sure. But Toxoplasma gondii is a pathogen that's associated with schizophrenia. So
Toxoplasmosis. Okay.
yeah, Toxoplasma gondii is associated with a lot of mental disorder. And again, it is because it's such a serotonin and dopamine affecting bug. In its normal life, it has an association with a cat and a mouse. So it starts life in a cat, and then a cat will kind of poop it out, and mice will eat the cat poop or whatever, but mice get it. When mice get it, it causes the mice to lose their fear of cats. They literally lose their sensitivity to cat urine, their smell, and they kind of get lethargic and they're not scared of cats anymore. So the cats eat them. So it creates this cycle. But again, it turns out Toxoplasma gondii can do the same thing to us. It can begin to alter
Oh,
dopamine and serotonin status and mess with our brains.
that's
So,
interesting.
so
Let's
if you
think.
look at
Go ahead. I'm sorry, I just cut you off there.
no,
Finish that
it's
thought.
just to finish it off. So we have a tool in our clinic called bioresonance. And again, if you go look up bioresonance, it's a little woo-hoo, but you need to know how to use it. But it will in frequency identify a lot of these pathogens. And so it really helps to, like I'll have people come in and they'll say, gee, I have heart problems. Okay. And you hook them up to the machine and you go, well, you have about a 10-year hook rounded pinworm infection that likely, because of the chronic inflammation and because of what it's doing to your blood and thickening your blood, is causing pressure on your heart because it's harder to move thick hydraulic fluid than thin hydraulic fluid. So, anyway, from this clinical perspective and kind of using these tools, you begin to really realize that the cause of most disease is pathogenic. There's certainly, you can't say all disease because everyone can always find an exception, but the cause of most disease is going to be underpinned by these bugs.
So I like this idea of a virus hijacking an animal's nervous system. And you use the case and example of a rat that all of a sudden loses its fear of cats and then becomes food, and that enhances the viral life cycle. Or the rabies virus, which makes an animal salivate and want to bite other things. I think that that's fascinating. And in many ways, these bacteria, whether they're secreting serotonin or the secondary bile acids that you speak of, um, or there you eat the donut. For me, I confession, I have a McDonald's addiction. Now, I don't eat McDonald's every day, but it happens when I'm on a road trip. And I remember when my mom didn't want to cook. My mom didn't want to cook when I was a little teeny kid. She'd take me and my brother to McDonald's and we'd get a cheeseburger and she'd cut it in half and he'd get half and I'd get the other. That's how small I was. But I see those golden arches on a road trip and it makes me, there's an emotional reaction. And when I eat that cheeseburger, or usually I'm not going to say the trademark names anymore. But anyway, so I eat that food, and while I'm seated and eating it, I feel good. But literally, I've observed this 100 times, half an hour, maybe 2 hours later, I have a big problem in my life that I am having trouble dealing with. And where does that problem come from? Does it come from the cheeseburger? Does it come from the bugs? I've just noticed this dozens and dozens and dozens of times. And so I'm starting to link my food with my mental state. And I think that this might be a good way for us to segue into care and feeding of our endocannabinoid system, of how we can maybe modify and enhance our resilience, our willpower, if you want to call it that. That could be one avenue of this fork in the road, or we could talk about evolutionary aspects of this system and how it helped single-celled organisms form and start to get together to form bodies, and that's why it's so widely distributed throughout human tissues. I don't care, Chip, left or right. Which way do you want to go?
Let's go the food route because I think that's the most important discussion that we can have just in science right now, right? Because we have such a and gosh, guys, I hate to, breathe the bearer of bad tidings, but all of us are addicted to food. And again, for the very reason that you just described beautifully, Jake, if you think about your relationship with food, and I was a guy who I couldn't go 4 hours without eating, right? So I thought I'd die. I really thought I would just run out of gas and be, so I was that guy. So I was as extreme here as you can possibly be. I was the guy that would eat. When my wife cooked for me, she'd have to cook for 3 or 4 additional people because I ate that much food. So I'm that guy. But I'm now intermittent fast. I eat in a 4 hour window. I eat, maybe
Oh,
1,200 to
wow.
1,500 calories a day. I
How
don't
many?
eat 12 to 1,500 calories. I
Oh,
don't eat meat. I still eat sugar, and that's still a thing. I mean, I'll be in the store and I'll be driving down the aisle and I'll look at the cinnamon rolls or I'll look at the, sugary stuff, and I'm like, yeah, I want that. It's a reward. I'm doing so good otherwise. But
treat
all these
myself.
Right, but think about those mental games. So those mental games are not coming from a place of good health. I know in my mind that sugar is bad for me. Those mental games are coming from dopamine and serotonin hits that those bugs are giving me. If you really get down to it, and it's sort of bothersome to think this way, and it's kind of scary. But again, with will, we can always override that noise. If our relationship to food, so let's talk about what we should eat to feed the endocannabinoid system, because again, this is the key to nutrition. And if I feel so sorry for really clinicians and dietitians right now that are trying to work with people on diet, because it's such a chaotic and confused mess out there. Okay, but let me make it real simple and break it down just as simply as we can, because this is what we need for the endocannabinoid system, but this is also just what you need for a cell. And again, if you just break this down to what a cell needs dietary fat, first of all. That's how we run. We can run on sugar, so you can run on carbohydrates, but it's 50 times less efficient, literally. So, your mitochondria will run on glucose, and that's basic, very default mode. Mitochondria will run on fat. That's 50 times more efficient. So again, if I'm an athlete, that's where I want to be. If I'm worried about sickness, if I have cancer, that's where I want to be. If I'm worried about my immune system, I want to be up here and 50 times more efficient. Every time we eat a meal, whop, we go over here into glucose mode for 5 hours. Okay. So right off, we want to eat less. So we want to confine our eating down to a short window because we don't want to live over here like we do most of the time. You've got no way to fight cancer here. You've got 2 ways to fight cancer here. You've got you've got somewhat of an immune system, but we're just defenseless against hook-rounded pinworms and pylori and COVID and all this stuff that wants to affect us over here. Over here, we've got shields, man. We've got a 50 times stronger immune system, right?
Talk a little bit more about that, both on the undefended side versus the defended side. Do you mean because if we're not eating through large windows of time, you mentioned the 4 hour window, is that because the gut lumen is largely has time to empty from food and there's an acid mantle protecting us there? Or talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, our bodies really have these big states, right? That we first of all have to be concerned with. So I'm glad you brought this up. So we have a circadian state, okay, and your CB1 neuroreceptors in your body will express around circadian rhythms. Okay, so there's times when you have
True.
more and times when you have less. So we have to, so if you're looking at the gut and what's going on at the gut, well, if you have more CB1 neuroreceptors expressed in your gut, you're going to be hungry. And the more you express, the hungrier you're going to get. It's just the way that it works. Because control surface, control area. The more mushrooms pop up, the more you're going to get hungry. Okay, so that matters. And again, if you're looking at intermittent fasting, well, I know about 3 hours after I wake up that I'm going to start expressing more CB1 neuroreceptors. So I'm likely going to feel like I'm hungry, but I may not be hungry. I may not really need nutrients, right? So, right off the bat, you kind of need to know that. And then, we need to know the consequences of eating, because you have like two major ways that you function: a way that you function right after you ate, and a way that you function 5 hours after you ate. And your body, if you start eating sugar stuff, so carbohydrates, your body has to set a tone, because the way that you deal with those, the way that you digest them, the way that you take them and put them into your bloodstream, the way that you store them as glycogen is completely different than over here in fats. Over here in fats, I've got to release a bunch of bile acids. I've got to emulsify those fats. So again, just by the composition of the meal that you ate, you're setting two different states. So we have to begin to understand these things and really design our inputs around what is, let's say, the least cost, most benefit to our body. And it's more than just a, here, Dr. Jake, take this pill, you'll feel better. So Ozempic is not going to get us there, with obesity. We have to sort of take all these other considerations and factors into, our equation for how we help people. So.
And it goes back to Hippocrates, the ancient Greek father of modern medicine. Food is the best medicine.
And
Um,
food is programming, so that.
and yeah, and in naturopathic medicine, we always say for chronic disease, you must treat the gut. And it's been fascinating for me because I've been a little over 20 years now since I've been in practice. So I've seen a full generation, really, if you think of it that way. When I when I first got out of medical school, they thought we were kooks talking about these gut bacteria. They literally thought we were kooks. And that's fine, but complex patient, simple treatment, adequate rest, diet, which is critical because those are the bricks in the building blocks. And you got to move the machine. So exercise is important as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about exercise crossover with endocannabinoid system, or should we keep going down the food highway here?
We can talk about whatever you want, but exercise is, if you look at like how to optimize yourself, again, I get better when you starve me. Okay. I get
See,
better.
so let's talk about that because I think I'm a little behind you on this because I'm a big guy and I have still a lot of muscles that are hungry, and I get hungry and I feel hungry. Now, I know physiologically speaking, caffeine, which is what I'm drinking now, with caffeine, you can caffeine will make you feel like your blood sugar is low, but it could still be normal. So caffeine, the coffee and donuts, right? The caffeine makes me feel like I have a little bit of low blood sugar. But if you test my blood sugar, it's not low. So
Mhm.
I don't know if that's a thing, but I'll let you riff on this because I'm just here and I'm taking notes and
So,
enjoying this, Chip, very much.
oh, me too. So this is great. I love doing this. But so you kind of have these two systems inside of you, right? You have kind of this glucose system and you have this lipid fat-based system, right? And again, this goes back to mitochondria and fuel. We're designed over here. We're designed to run over here, but we can default, over here to sugar. So if you look at energy and kind of, if you're a high performance athlete, let's say, what should I feed you and what's important? Well, the first thing is fats, and not really short chain fats or trans fats. So it's got to be stuff that comes out of a plant, which is saturated fat, and that's saturated fat is important. It's not as important as monounsaturated fat, which we don't eat enough of. So those two things we should kind of eat in balance. And saturated fat is inflammatory. So when it breaks down into endocannabinoids, it's breaking down in your immune system, escanoids, it's breaking down into things that cause inflammation. Monounsaturated fat is the other side of that, let's say. So as monounsaturated fat breaks down, it breaks down into anti-inflammatories, and it's our more anti-inflammatory fat. Right now, we eat way more saturated fat in our diet than we eat monounsaturated. But if you eat like a nut, most nuts are balanced almost perfect. And they'll have a little more monounsaturated than saturated. But the most important fatty acids that we eat every day, and these are essential. Your body can kind of reclaim and make saturated fat, and your body can kind of reclaim and make monounsaturated fat. It cannot make these two. And these are called polyunsaturated fatty acids, and they're omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. It is super important. And in fact, I can so mess you up if I just feed you the wrong ratio of these guys.
Yep, great, good. I have questions about this because
Okay.
it is an area that I maybe should be more familiar with than I don't. But in terms of omega-3s and omega-6s, we have the, polyunsaturated fatty acids, PUFAs, as the term is, EPA and DHA, and there's a ratio. One of those ratios is good for inflammation, at least according to my recall here, and another ratio is really good for brain health. Typically, omega-6s, typically omega-3s are thought of as anti-inflammatory and omega-6s as pro-inflammatory, but the cannabis plant through hemp seed makes an omega-6 GLA, which is anti-inflammatory. Why don't we dive into either your choice of EPA DHA ratios or omega-6 pro anti-inflammatory? I don't know if this is, but you're nodding your head there, Chip. So
Yep.
let's
Let's go.
keep diving.
Let's dive. So on omega-3s, you mentioned DHA and EPA, which are omega-3 molecules that are good, and they generally come from fish. There's a more important, I would say, molecule that is the precursor to DHA and EPA, and it's called alpha-linolenic acid, and it's what's found in seeds. And so, my thing is God built us a perfect system out there in nature. So it's, I want to kind of go to nature and not necessarily an animal. I want to really go to a plant to kind of find the genesis, right? So the, proper, place, right? So for me, that alpha-linolenic acid is super important. And let me tell you why this is really important. Because if I give you alpha-linolenic acid and I give your wife, let's say, alpha-linolenic acid, or a female alpha-linolenic acid, she will break that down into DPA and EPA and DHA in different ratios than you and I will. Okay. And that says something, and that enzyme that gets expressed to do that is a very important sort of feedback mechanism in how we run our whole body. Okay. So we want that enzyme go in and express. So we want to stimulate that enzyme really with alpha-linolenic versus EPA and DHA. So kind of right.
Okay.
Okay.
So
So
not so much the fish oils then.
yeah, nope. Chia seed, flax seed, hemp seed, all of
Mhm.
those are super good. And generally, you want something because we get so much omega-6 in our diet from corn, and it's just everywhere, in our diet. When we look at sort of supplementing, we want to really be heavy on omega-3. So if we were balanced in our diet, we wouldn't want to be heavy in omega-3, but we're not balanced in our diet. So we want to be heavy in
Okay,
omega-3. So we really want to find things that have more omega-3 than omega-6. And
cool.
there are
Great,
not
great.
many things. Yeah, there's not many things.
Okay.
But
I,
chia.
I had some of that this morning with breakfast, but I also had it with oatmeal, which is carb heavy. But now oatmeal also contains a lot of tryptophan, so it gets interesting. But anyway, okay.
Yep.
So this, I know you're a pro plant guy, and that's the diet I mostly eat. I'm entirely vegetarian when I cook at home. Have been for a long time. But if I go out to a friend's and they're having a barbecue, yeah, I'll have some chicken or I'll have some fish, or so I'm not a purist in that respect. But there are, and everybody, one of the problems with clinical medicine is it's hard to work with diet because it's emotional. I have
Mhm.
found that almost all of my patients think they're food experts because we've been eating food our whole life. So we all think we're a food expert. So with that being said, what do you think of these carnivorous diets where people are eating almost exclusively meat? That fascinates me, and I've heard some brilliant, I can't remember his name or I'd say it right now, brilliant people saying, I'll debate anybody. Let's go toe to toe here, vegetarian diet versus this animal diet. But can you talk to that in terms of these fats, these lipids?
Mhm.
Or do you want to move to a different? topic
Oh
is
no,
fine.
we need to talk about aminos. So let's not lose. And to kind of your question about what can you do? So fats are the most important thing in the fats that we're talking about. So saturated, monounsaturated, O3, O6. So bingo. That's the most important thing for our body, but they have to be in the right ratio. The second most important thing are amino acids. And again, none of us pay attention to this and none of us get this right. So there's 9 essential amino acids that we have to have every single day. The fats, I can skip a day without omega-3s. I mean, I store them on triglycerides, but I can't skip a day without the 9 essential amino acids. I will suffer in some way. So cells want to run on something, right? So they have an engine, mitochondria, and they want to run on fats, which is what we're talking about. Cells are little factories and they want to produce things and they want to produce proteins. They have to have inputs to do that, and those inputs are all amino acids. So protein's just a string of amino acids. So I got to have amino acids coming in order to have amino acids going out. And so my factory will shut down if I don't have the amino acids coming in. But to your point about, so for like an athlete or someone who's working on their muscles, they're intermittent fasting, it's very important to hit the fats right and the aminos right. Carbs, not so much. You know, again, you can 48 hours after you quit eating, you'll burn through all your glucose and you'll stay alive for 38 more days. So you don't really need glucose. Okay, so now to carnivore, because this is super important because a lot of people are doing this. So carnivore will begin to right a lot of the wrongs that we have from our high carb, high sugar diet. Okay. But it's going to be a lot of saturated fat, and it's only going to be the right aminos. You're dependent on that, let's say, farmer, that producer of the meat, that he gave the 9 aminos to that meat so that the 9 aminos are in that meat that you're eating. Okay. So if you're going all carnivore, I would say you need to be concerned about supplementing with omega-3. And you need to be also concerned with making sure that you're getting all 9 amino acids, because you won't get omega-3 in that meat. There's
You
no,
don't, even though like don't herbivores, cows, goats, etc., can take in grass and rework those nitrogen pathways and create what they need. I don't know. I only know that in humans we have essentials, and we have one that's kind of semi-essential, and then the other ones we can all make if we get the building blocks. But I have no idea about cows or
it's
sheep
it's
or
it's
lamb.
programming. So garbage in, garbage out, right? So if you let a cow do its thing, and let it graze naturally, and let it sort of, if you just feed a cow hemp,
Okay,
you
so you're
know,
talking a lot of corn fed now.
right now, so what we feed our animals is crap. And
Gotcha.
that crap is what defines the fat and meat in those animals and defines the nutrient content in those animals. So you're really, when you're eating meat, you're eating the stuff that farmer fed that meat.
Okay, this is coming back to me a little bit. I remember my I was having dinner. I was having dinner with this gentleman who was I don't recall if he was at the time or if he had just retired, chief of surgery at Michigan State University. Brilliant, brilliant guy. And it was at a steakhouse, and I think we came up with the grass-fed versus the typical corn fed, and he's like, yeah, but the corn fed, it tastes so much better.
And it
Perhaps that's the
does.
lipid. Yeah.
It does. But that is exactly what it is. So, like if I have a cow, and here's the thing about that we don't, and again, this is so chaotic and confused if you go out there and kind of trying to find this information. But for an amino acid to be created, protein, okay, for an amino acid to be created, I have to fix nitrogen. All right. I have to be
Yep.
able to fix nitrogen. And there's only bacteria are what fix nitrogen. Bacteria will, plants will uptake that bacteria and begin to build amino acids from that bacteria, but animals don't do that. Okay, we alter protein. So I can take a glycine and make it into a cysteine or whatever. So I can alter amino acids, but I can't make them. And a cow can't make them. A cow has to eat them just like you do. So we have to, when we sort of, goes back to the sort of vegetarian versus, animal product argument. And I'm like you, I eat from plants. We eat, plant-based diet at home. But, if I go to a party or something, or, I'll eat meat, if it's sort of the only thing there. But, you want to be your own farmer. You want to be in control of what you put in your body. You don't want to rely on that farmer. You don't want to rely on that guy who's growing the cows. You don't want to rely on that feedlot, on that chicken processing, on that beef processing. You want to be in control of what goes into you because it's programming you.
Oh, wow. Chip, wow. How fantastic this conversation is going. Um, I don't have any other thoughts or questions. Is there something about this? Well, here I have one in terms of amino acid intake. Um, Pre-workout, talking about feeding muscles now, not the whole thing, but pre-workout versus post-workout. Branch chain amino acids, leucine, isoleucine, valine, very rapidly absorbed, put them right in our muscles, help us go, 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 help us recover, recover. Do you think about that in terms of this process? Because those are essentials, but do you think about that, or is that not a way you think about the amino acids?
Yeah, and I've worked with some athletes. Like I've got a boxer that I'm working with now, and we've got some, let's say, athletes taking some of our natural products. So we've looked at a lot of this stuff, and here's the thing with, and this is just this is sort of somewhat contrary to kind of what we think, but I'll just tell you this is the way your body works. So when we are in a fasted state, okay, now I'm talking about you've done a lot to model
In
your.
terms of ketosis, fasted for like 3 days plus, we're in.
No, no, it just like if you're an out, let's say
Just we've run out of glucose and glycogen.
I'm a football player. I'm ready to go play this football game. I'm a golfer. I'm ready to go participate in a golf match. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to be better as an athlete, and you can translate that down to your immune system or going in a bunch of people that have COVID. I'm going to be better in a fasted state. And what that means is, not going 6 days without eating. It just means going 5 hours without eating. So I'm going to be in an advanced state. I'm going to be 50 times more energetic if I can just get 5 hours past my last meal. Now, to me, that's where I want to be. If I'm going to participate in an athletic event, I want to be 50 times more energetic, 50 times, 50 times, 50 times more everything. So to me, the pre-workout looks like go into a workout fasted. Okay, go into a workout fasted, and then right after that workout is where you want to hit with a bunch of, protein and let's say aminos and fats to rebuild, that muscle activity. But in a perfect world, if I sort of had you and I could sort of have your time and your time to eat and everything, there would be a time for you to exercise. There would be a time for you to eat. And again, those would be windows. And those windows would, and I don't know exactly what the right time to exercise is, but they would correspond to your circadian rhythm.
Hmm.
It's it's hard to, if your body wants to go into a state, right? So if your body wants to, let's say, de-express CB1 or express a bunch of CB1 neuroreceptors and sort of act like it's hungry, it's really hard to fight that, so it's really hard to fight that state. And so we want to better understand these sort of way
Okay.
nuances that we go
So
through.
let me just pop in here, because I'm going to ask it from a first person perspective, because I'm a big fella. I weigh about 230 pounds, at least the last time I checked. And I got a lot of muscle. I definitely have some adipose on the belly. I had too many years of drinking beer. I don't do so much of that anymore. But I am still a surfer, and I love to surf. One of the things I noticed, a couple of things I noticed, performance enhancing for me personally, surfing, CBD prior to surf, I just definitely had more stamina. I attributed it to better glycemic control. beta caryophylline before surfing, which is sesquiterpene, predominant terpene. And live in Washington, so we are usually even in neoprene in the summertime. Rarely does our water get over 60 degrees Fahrenheit. But anyway, way better cold tolerance with beta caryophylline as
Huh,
way better
I'll tell
cold
you a cool
tolerance.
story in a second. This is
Okay,
cool.
okay. But I hardly, I'm, I, we share a lot of commonalities because I am a grazer. I have a morning snack, which is usually fruit of some sort. Then I'll do my morning walk, which is usually 2 or 3 miles. I try to get 4 miles in a day. Then I come back and I have breakfast, and then I work, and then I have a late morning snack, and then I have lunch, and then I have an afternoon snack, and then I have dinner. And so that's me the whole time. Now, if I need to surf and I haven't had food like within 2 hours, I feel like I'm crashing and burning. Are you saying that there's a better way to do this now?
Yes.
What has helped me, one of my best surf partners is former special ops, which is even many would argue more elite than Navy SEALs, but he's always having me do coconut oil and B complex before we get in the water. I like that. I definitely feel that that works. But talk to me from my perspective as an aging athlete who wants to stay out there longer and have a quicker recovery time, and just push back on me a little bit because that's my experience. Please.
So
And I'm not saying that I don't agree with you. I'm just saying I have trouble when I don't eat.
no, and so we'll address that. But first of all, like just your behavior right now. So again, you're in a degraded state, and just by your eating frequency, you're putting yourself and kind of keeping yourself down here. Okay. And so what I'd suggest that you do, and the easiest way to do this is kind of the kindest way to start, but you need to narrow your window, and I'll talk about a window in a second, to let's say 10 hours or less, and ideally 8 hours or less, and even 6 hours to 4 hours. So we want that window to be less than 10 hours for sure, and at least 8 hours. Okay. And so what I mean by a window is first time you eat over 50 calories, whoop, you open your window. And the last time you eat for the day, you close your window. So right now, if you're eating a little bit in the morning, and a lot of people do this, like they'll eat a little bit in the morning before they go work out because that's just what we've been trained to do, and that's why we think that that's going to help us, and it really hurts us. Okay, it's not helping you in your workout. It's not giving you additional energy. In fact, it's putting you over here. It's taking you from a 50 times more energetic state to a 1x state. Okay, so we want to minimize that flip. And I'll tell you a story about a bear in a second because it'll help with
Oh
all this.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Cool.
but anyway, so if you could push eating your first like major calories over 50 calories to noon, okay, and then stop eating by 8 o'clock, your energy balance, everything about your physicality will begin to change. You'll also begin to lose weight, but you won't lose too much weight. If you continue to do this, let's say past your optimal weight, you will just stay at your optimal weight. So you'll begin to lose fat though that you don't need, and you'll begin to basically get to and you'll do it faster the narrower you put your window. In a 4 hour window, you'll do it pretty fast. But what you'll begin to find, and I have this same problem too. I'm the guy that can't go, 4 hours without eating, right? Yeah. So how do we do that? How do we get over the hump? If you take a tablespoon of olive oil,
Oh,
yeah, and it turns out, without getting into too much intellectual property, that an endocannabinoid is built from oleic acid, and there's nuances here, but again, you're going to build that endocannabinoid, and that is your satiety molecule. So
okay.
that will help you.
My understanding is that the olive oil has components that feed into OEA, the endocannabinoid, but it doesn't contain them itself. The body does there's one or two steps involved. Um, does olive oil have over 50 calories or does it not count? Because I could very easily, and this is why my buddy, he's like, he carries coconut oil. It's usually
Yeah.
solid. He's like, let's have some coconut oil before we get in.
Yep. And the coconut oil, again, is doing the same thing that the olive oil would be doing. So it's helping you, it's giving you a little bit of energy, but it's not like flipping you into this fed state. Okay. So it's, less than 50 calories, but it's going to give you a little bit of energy while it doesn't flip you over here. It doesn't sort of cause this whole body,
Hmm.
pathway change. Okay. But interestingly, on the beta caryophyllene, I was beta caryophyllene is in my patent as a name molecule. I'm not going to come after anybody,
Okay.
for it, but it's out in my issued patent. So it's, if we want to go create drugs around it, then I've got a way to protect it.
Oh, okay. Great.
Okay.
Great. Great. Great.
But interestingly, beta caryophyllene, it's interesting that you said cold because beta caryophyllene hits CB2, it hits that whole side of the endocannabinoid system. It's a more powerful modulator of that whole side than, anything in cannabis but THC. But pandas, okay, panda bears will do something really weird. And they found this out on the kind of trade trail when they had horses, but pandas would roll around in horse poop and they could not figure
They
out.
like a dog will roll and stuff.
Yeah, and they couldn't figure out why the pandas were rolling around in horse poop. Well, they finally figured out it was because of beta caryophyllene. And so it's just interesting that pandas are a cold weather animal. It's attracted to beta
Yeah.
caryophyllene. So it's just fascinating.
Oh, there's no doubt. I mean, it's all N of one stuff, but the reason I know this, Chip, is because I am a cold wimp. Wimp. WIMP.
Oh, me too. That's my
And I
life.
surf in very cold water. In fact, I didn't surf in Washington for years because I was like, that water's too cold. Finally, a buddy of mine got me into some neoprene, and I realized, oh, you know, people, when you tell them you surf in Washington, they say, isn't it cold? But if you tell people you snowboard, people never say, oh, isn't it cold if you snowboard? What am I doing snowboarding? I'm not just in jeans and a t-shirt. You put on boots and layers. And so, but for maximum enjoyment, if you're not having fun, you're done and you got to get out of the water when it's cold. And you can just tell. I mean, it's not even close. It's not, let's just say it's not even close. Um, and a lot of plants will have warming properties. That's very common in Chinese medicine to have warming or heating properties in plants. But another thing about bears that may be a good segue here is hibernation activity in bears. These were Swedish bears, if I'm not mistaken. Um, has to affect their biologic clocks. And you mentioned circadian rhythms. Um, there's a German word that's escaping me now, but the chronobiotic reset can sometimes, the cannabinoids can do that. So I'm seeing all this CBD now in airports. You got to go nighty night on your intercontinental plane, right? And you wake up and your clock is much better. Why don't we chat a little bit about circadian rhythms, biologic clocks, and any thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Sleeping.
No, that's great. And the Zeitbringers was the word that you were thinking.
Zeitgebers, if I'm not mistaken. There we go.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
If I'm not.
And so it's looking like now, and again, this is, I just think about things different. So I view things different and I kind of have a different take on science. So this is, again, a little bit of theory and a little bit of, let's say, but it's, again,
That's why I wanted to have this talk, Chip.
so
Because people are, if you're a conventional academic, you are a little bit afraid to step out of the ring. And so let's go.
okay, so it's looking like, again, it's looking like we always have these circulating ligands. And right now we measure stuff in blood and saliva. So this is a very important discussion to have because, again, that may not be the best way to measure stuff. Okay.
Right.
So we have these ligands, but these ligands will kind of go up and down with circadian, right? So we'll have more melatonin at 8 o'clock at night and we'll have less melatonin at noon. Okay. So it's just, they just circulate like this. But then our receptors will also express around that same sort of cycle. So it's looking like there's certain times circadian wise that your body wants to do work, right? So it's, you might digest food at a certain time, you might build immune mediators, and it's a little bit more sophisticated than that, build hormones at a certain time. But we do this thing every single day, and we do it the same way every single time. The most disruptive thing that we do in all that, eat. Because as soon as we eat, it's like kryptonite. We lose 50% of our strength, and we got to stop, and we can't do what we normally need to do, except there is a time to eat, looks like in the evening. So again, circadian is super important to understand. Like if I'm trying to influence your serotonin system, well, I better darn sure understand the circadian expression of your serotonin receptors, because it doesn't matter how much serotonin you have expressed at any given time. It really doesn't matter, right? Because again, it's like I can have a bunch of balls in the air. If I don't have any mitts to catch them, it doesn't matter. So it's more about receptor expression than it is about how many ligands I have circulating. But that's all circadian, right? So that will go in circadian rhythms, which is really cool. How you optimize around that, again, all of these things we just need to better understand. So like I'm a mathematician, so I view things like a computer model, let's say. And it looks like we work around this big algorithm, okay? This big algorithm. And this big algorithm kind of has to do with pathways, and pathways being off and on. But we need to understand what physical and circadian processes we're fighting when we're trying to alter these processes. If we don't understand that, then why are we even trying to alter a process? We're creating likely harm if we don't understand all this other stuff. So you have to understand the endocannabinoid system in order to algo you, Jake. I've got to understand the endocannabinoid system.
It astounds me, and again, I think it goes back to the marketing problem of this system. It astounds me that probably you have too. I've been talking about this for 15 years, and it only was in the last year or so, maybe a year and a half, that I've realized, oh, it's a marketing problem. I mean, we don't when we talk about inflammation and the cyclooxygenase pathway and NSAIDs as a drug, we don't call it the willow pathway or the chili pepper pathway, even though that's how we discovered it. Is we were like, how does willow affect headache? Or how do chili peppers affect pain? The plants taught us this, not
Yep.
because they whispered them to us in our dreams, which is a whole nother story, but because scientists were like, what's this vanilla doing? It seems to be effective in headache. And they found this transient receptor potential vanilloid system that is pain and temperature run on this pathway. They don't call it the vanilla pathway or the chili pepper pathway. Anyway, so fascinating. Why don't I just kick it back to you? Because I just wanted to cut in on that.
Yeah, no, we have to be, so fasting and fed, two major states in our body that we absolutely have to be concerned. If let's say I'm doing drug development or I'm trying to help you clinically, I need to understand this. I need to understand the
It's so
fasting.
important. And that was the hardest thing in biochemistry for me. I did some undergrad biochemistry, and then in medical school, I I finally thought I understood metabolism, and then all of a sudden, we have to learn the biochemistry of the starving state as opposed to the fed state, and it's different. What are you talking about? Oh my goodness! It was
And
amazing to me that we do the whole. And a lot of the molecular machinery will get swapped out. They swap it
absolutely.
right out, and so we're not running on sugar anymore, guys. We got to swap out the engine. We're not running on diesel fuel anymore. We got to, or, however you want to think about it.
And
Um,
in
Good.
literature, the crazy thing in literature and what you're taught in medical school, what you're taught in literature, what you're taught everywhere is that this is normal, that the fed state is the normal state of a human. That is
Yes,
not,
that was like
I know. And that's not
90%,
correct.
maybe 95% of the biochemistry, and and so I was like, I was like, oh, good, following these sugar molecules around, and we're we're taking these complex reduced molecules and breaking them down to simple, relatively oxidized molecules, breathing out the carbon dioxide and running all the machinery off of that, and building the proteins with the energy from the ATP from the sugar. It was all sugar based.
Yep. And it turns out, gosh, if I can teach you that and kind of keep science over there, I'm going to create a much more vulnerable population. And it's likely going to, feed my evil business model. And
Let me tell you a secret that a lot of people don't know. I'm going to whisper it. Can you hear
okay.
me through the mic? There's money in drugs.
Yeah, I know. I know. I know. So the cool thing though is that and I think I think you're right with me. I think that old model that we're talking about, the sugar model, let's call it, is changing. And again, we're blowing it up. We're blowing it up right now. We're blowing it up every time we open our mouths. But we need to blow it up because we need to bring in this more, let's say, godly, or however you want to look at it, more nature-based or plant-based, or whatever, but this more proper model that's fat-based, that's really designed around the endocannabinoid system. So this model over here parties around the endocannabinoid system. And maybe that's why these fellows don't want you to know about this over here, because they don't want you to be 50
Well,
times.
at least until they have, I mean, and now the AI is looking at huge complexities of iterations just in and around CB1 receptor. So they're really targeting a single, you use the word glove. I like that analogy, a single receptor model for this. And,
Yeah, and you
that's
can't.
not really how biology works.
Mm-mm.
You always, in order to have homeostasis, you always have to have a minimum, and in biology there's not more, but of two negative feedback loops. And the analogy I use is a thermostat. You put it on auto in your car, and if it gets too hot, the air conditioning turns on. That's a negative feedback. The temperature's going up, the AC clicks on and it goes down. That's negative feedback. Or if it gets too cold, the heat comes on and the temperature goes up. So those are negative feedback loops. In biology, the vast majority of pathoses are positive feedback loops. They create a lot of havoc. And if you are just running one drug in one pathway, that, unless there is a very strong total physiologic vector in the opposite direction, making that a negative feedback loop, you can create positive, and it can happen systemically. So this is why plants, when we talked about willow already, so let's bring it in. Willow, you step on a plant, you bend its leaf, you twist the stem. That plant can't go to the urgent care and get a bandage put on it unless it's a very lucky apple or plum tree and the farmer's gonna to wrap it properly. It has to make its own healing molecules, and the plant will almost invariably make blends. So
Mhm.
willow makes salicylates, which are anti-inflammatory to the willow. If you hurt the willow, it has to heal itself. And what do we know about willows that's unusual about willow versus, say, pine trees? You get a heavy snow in a pine forest, all of those branches break, but the willow bends. So willow molecules help a very flexible structure, and they make salicylates. Now, those are information-based molecules. It just so happens if you take salicylates and you spray them on the leaves of a cannabis plant, the signaling processes of the cannabis plant, that signaling cascade creates more flowers, more terpenes, more cannabinoids. You
Really?
take that, yes, you take that willow, those salicylates into our body, it works on the willow system, the cyclooxygenase pathway, and it helps reduce our inflammation. So, but the plants are never, hardly ever making single molecules to do a job because that's inefficient. It's just inefficient. So let them make their patents, and I hope you make a lot of money on your patents. They have their role, but if we're talking about generalized health and maintenance of health, or maintenance of what's left of my health if I have a chronic disease to support and shore up that, I get a leak in my boat. I want to patch that boat and turn on the bilge pumps. I want to maintain the health of that boat while I deal with this emergency situation. Anyway, uh, kick it back to you. I see a nodding your head there.
Yeah, no, I loved it. So, first drug ever was based on, you say it different than me, but salicylic acid,
Oh
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Hmm. I don't
From
know if I'm
Louisville.
pronouncing that right.
And that would, no, you're probably saying, I don't, again, I'm not I'm a layman I'm a mathematician coming.
I've
So
always heard it say salicylates. So that's how
salicylate,
I've
and
always
that's
heard it
probably
said. But there's many different ways to say it.
no, but that's probably the right way. But anyway, you're right. And again, interestingly, that acid, the S acid, so the S acid is a specific type of acid. It's called a carboxylic acid. Okay.
Okay.
And carboxylic acids are powerful
Three
things.
oxygen bonds on that carbon.
Yes, sir. So now you're talking, and now we're going to get into a little bit of a shift into chemistry, but now we get into a little bit of woohoo. So again, how do I affect change in the body? Well, are there commonalities? Every single cannabinoid is a carboxylic acid with a phenol ring. And again, phenol rings have, if I want to de-abduct DNA, we get what is the if you look at the cause of cancer, okay, so because this will go to DNA and de-abducting DNA. So if you look at the cause of cancer, cancer can be caused by a pathogen. So something called H. pylori will cause stomach cancer, right? So if you have H. pylori, you need to address it because it can cause stomach cancer. But so you think, oh, well, okay, all cancers can be caused by pathogens. Well, no, because again, I can hold this uranium-232 cancer, right? So there has to be a more common kind of thing there. And it turns out it's kind of what cancer does to DNA, or what happens to DNA. And the DNA kind of becomes alive and becomes like a cancerous thing. Will stick your cells in sugar mode. Okay. So because it favors it metabolically.
Is it the sorbitol pathway?
It's called Warburg. It's called the
The
Warburg.
Warburg effect. Yeah.
And so, and it's cell, and again, you can run cells on glucose, or you can run cells on fat or light, but the stick cells, cancer wants to stick your cells, even in the presence of oxygen and fat, where they should pop up here, sticks them in glucose mode, right? So
Oh,
anyway, but
yeah.
if you look at cancer, it kind of all goes back to DNA. And we have kind of this basic understanding of DNA. Most of us do, helical structure, all this. Well, it's way more freaking complicated than that, I'll tell you. There's always stuff that's going to glom onto DNA, and your DNA gets all this crap all over it. And again, that's kind of the genesis, let's say, of cancer happens when DNA gets what they call adducted. It gets a bunch of crap stuck on it. So a phenol ring, so THC, CBD, anything with a phenol ring will deabduct DNA, which is useful.
Interesting. I'll tell a little story then about CBD, even though it's really a hemp story. Um, Most people know, a lot of people know this, but I'll just fill in the back history. At the turn of, at the beginning of our country's founding, there was an edict that farmers had to grow hemp everywhere. Thomas Jefferson grew hemp. Thomas Jefferson had weed growing all over his property, and
Yep.
it's useful. If you turns out if you so I'm going to tie this into molecular structure of plants, and I'll kick it back to you. It turns out if you plant hemp all the way around a pond, an irrigation pond, for example, after a while, all of the fish die in the pond. And it is not because the hemp is toxic to the fish, but one of the functions of CBD acid, not CBD, but the CBD acid in the plant, is that it is it prevents the cell division of competing foliage. So if there's a competing seed in the ground near the hemp plants, that CBD acid gets washed into, and that seed does not have as much of an ability to have cellular replication. So that gets washed into the pond. The algae cannot reproduce, and that's the predominant food source. So all of a sudden now the fish have starved. Now plants make molecules, they don't make molecules the way that pharmaceutical companies do, by thinking let's develop a single molecule that acts on a single receptor system. They make blends, and they're very efficient because they have to compete with other life forms, and if they waste their energy, they're not as they can't take advantage of their environment. So over evolutionary timescales, not only do plants make mixtures of multiple different molecules, but they also make molecules that work on multiple different receptors, and CBD is a classic example of that. It works on over 60 receptor and biochemical pathways. One molecule works on like 60 different pathways. And one of the things that it does in preclinical cell and tissue models of cancer is it slows the reproduction of the cancer cells. So I love this, that it is a single molecule hitting 60 receptor systems. And also, it's not the only molecule that the plant uses. A plant is going to use to have their own anti-inflammatory effects, or to repair tissue processes, or to make a chemical that calls in a wasp, because I've got aphids eating me on the back here. So let me make a molecule that talks to the wasp, just like that virus tells that rat or that mouse not to be afraid of cats. This plant makes a molecule that tells a hungry wasp, come, I got some aphids munching on me. Talk about that, Chip, in the context of endocannabinoid system, natural medicine.
Yeah, so it's just, boy, you said a mouthful there. That's a lot.
Sorry. I couldn't,
Oh,
I wanted to get it out. It had to come out.
yeah, no, and I completely agree. There's all these natural processes that we, in our arrogance, literally as men, we miss, we overlook. We think we've got this figured out, or we've already got this solved, and we really don't. But so if you take cancer, and again, so we're going to talk kind of botany, we're going to talk some chemistry here. But if you take cancer, again, if you look at cancer, let's say electrically, okay? So if you look at cancer as an electric thing, so we're electric beings. You're moving electrons through you all the time. You're moving them through ion channels, but you're constantly moving electrons. The water in you is very electric. It's very ionic, let's say. So you're constantly moving electrons. Well, cancer is where all electrons go to die. So cancer will be a place where electrons are shunted. So they're not moving. So they're basically, it's a sugar mass with no electrons moving. Its metabolism is sugar based, right? So it's sugary amino acid, and electrons won't move in the same way. If you introduce a carboxylic acid,
Because, just to interrupt, I'm just trying to work, because the electron shield, so to speak, or the orbital, is more involved with the carbon atom than out on the outer periphery. So is that what you mean by that? That
it,
it's more of a reduced molecule, or sorry, it's more of an oxidized molecule.
it's more the ionic pathways are blunted in that.
Okay.
And so you got your calcium channel kind of different and shut down. You got your potassium channel kind of different and shut down. But you've also have different electric properties that are associated with the proteins in that mass. And we'll get into, there's a whole model called the resonant recognition model of science about the kind of frequency and vibration of proteins, but they get altered in cancer. Let's say they get shunted to where they're not as powerful. So cancer looks like a way to it kind of shuts down electricity, and it's kind of a way to your body shut stuff down. Well, if I take a carboxylic acid, depending on how reactive it is, and again, it can be any carboxylic acid, so it could be CBD, it could be a lot of different things. And if I put that in the vicinity of that cancer, it's going to cause a conformational change in where that impacts that cancer. So you're going to have some proton exchange or electron exchange or something. You're going to have some reactivity. So if you do that enough, again, you're going to change the state of that mass. And so that's probably why carboxylic acids and things like THC have action at cancer, but it takes so much of them, right? So it takes such a concentration to be able to move that needle. There's also signaling aspects that go along with that. But, so again, it's looking like disease. So again, if you have an area of infection, let's say, caused by a pathogen, similarly, that's going to be an area where electrons don't flow in the same way that they would in normal tissue. And so your electrical properties are different. When you introduce these reactive phenols and carboxylic type chemical structures, motifs, you're altering that. You're allowing bonding to happen where it normally wouldn't, right? So, sorry, that's a little deep.
That's cool. No, no,
Way
no, no,
down that
no.
rabbit hole.
Okay. It just makes me think of connective tissue and extracellular brush border enzymes, which can hold and keep water isolated. Does that bring up anything that you'd like to talk about in extracellular space?
Water, so again, water is the universal solvent, and water is involved in pretty much every important chemical reaction, inside of you. Again, you have these two big major sort of a fat-based digestive system and a sugar watery based
Yeah,
digestive.
yes, I'm thinking glycans on the external aspect of the cell membrane.
And you kind of have ways to run yourself down both of these pathways, right? So again, you kind of have to know what's on and what's off, at a big picture. So I need to kind of know if you're in fasting and fed when I get down into cellular processes. So yeah, yeah, because
Great,
it
great,
matters. And,
great,
and
great.
it's if I try to, let's say I'm trying to do a fasted, I'm trying to flip AMPK. So this happens all the time. This is kind of what Ozempic does in a reverse way. So if you're trying to basically, I'm trying to flip you cellularly, I'm trying to force all your cells into a fasted state. Okay. Is that
So this
good
is
for
what I mean about that. It's a harsh vector in one direction. And
you?
and and if I haven't changed my diet because I'm relying on this drug, and I see this in diabetics all the time. At first, I really wanted to work with diabetics when I first got out of school because natural therapy, diet, and lifestyle really can help. But there's other things going on in the minds of diabetics, which is probably why, for type 2 especially, they've got to where they've gotten. But you have a drug with I'm going to see if I can get my pencil on my screen here, putting a vector on the physiology, and all of this behavioral mechanism is pushing the other way. And if we think of as homeostasis as multiple negative feedback mechanisms that are holding things in place, it's almost like you can pop the balloon of physiology if you push it too hard in one direction with a single drug, and that's called toxicity. Anyway, keep going on that. That's fascinating.
Yeah, and it's what you do. So let's take this example. Let's take a hard example. So let's say I'm trying to force you into a fasted state because it's advantageous to you. You're 50 times more powerful. You're, more athletic, however you want to look at it. So I want to force that switch. That switch is called AMPK. So it's a cellular switch called AMPK. So, and there's things that will force that switch. Resveratrol will force that switch. Okay.
Oh,
So
resveratrol. Okay. A
let's
plant
say
flavonoid.
yeah, so flavonoids. So, and again, I'm always going to talk about flavonoids. I rarely talk about drugs,
Oh,
but
good. Great.
yeah, because flavonoids are the way that we should be doing things. They're the kindest way to do things in our body. But let's say you're in a fed state, and I give you a bunch of resveratrol, so it's going to want to flip that switch. But again, your body is not going to let it happen because you can't fight that higher order pathway. And if you do fight that higher order pathway, again, what's going to happen when you're doing this? Oxidative stress. You're going to
Yeah.
you're going to create a
And
lot of
and
oxidative.
then you're going to have an electron ripping its way all the way through that cellular membrane, and one little electron can create so much havoc
He
on a
punches the
cell
whole
membrane.
he punches a hole in oxygen, and now that oxygen is now reactive, and it
I'm
goes
gonna
and
go steal an electron off of this thing, and then
and he goes and grabs
oh,
it
you
and makes
stole an electron. I'm gonna steal another. It's a positive feedback loop.
that
When that
reactive
electron is ripping through, one electron can cause so much damage, let alone a cacophony of electrons. All right, very cool.
and that one electron, again, if he gets to oxygen, if he creates a reactive oxygen species, that reactive oxygen species, guess what he likes to mess up? He likes to mess up O3 and O6 fatty acids, your only essential fats. So it's really interesting. You wonder, why does my hair fall out before I die? Why do my teeth fall out before I die? Why do I go blind before I die? That's poor engineering. God is not a poor engineer. There has to be a reason for that, right? And so it's, again, we should live longer than we do, a lot of things, and the reasons for all of this are really this stuff that we're talking about, how we allow ourselves to get infected, invaded, and we kind of do it to ourselves from lack of education.
Love it. We have about 6, maybe 7 minutes before Zoom boots us off of this call. So, in that remaining time, I just had one thought on flavonoids, and I was thinking proanthocyanidins in blueberry as epigenetic controllers of inflammation. That's just what popped into my head because you mentioned resveratrol. But do you want to talk about flavonoids, or is there something else you want to talk about with the remaining time we've got?
Flavonoids, I think, are great because I think
Let's chat flavonoids. So I'm a blueberry plant, and I've gotta spread my seeds around. So I'm gonna make this beautiful fleshy fruit, but I have to protect it from the sun, or wine needs to protect the grapes from the sun. And the French have a saying about wine: in order to make a great wine, the grapes must suffer. So
that's
they have to
great.
suffer out there in the bright sun and the cold nights. Anyway,
Stress.
talk to us about flavonoids, Chip.
Well, and again, it's stress. So even with cannabis, right? So how do you make, let's say, stronger cannabis? Well, you stress the plant. So when you stress it, this is just God's engineering. When I stress you, you get better. If I starve you, you get better. If I put you out in the freezing cold, you get better. If I sort of create atmospheric pressure around you, you get better. You don't get worse. And same with a plant. So we respond it's like tension and pressure is what kind of makes us better, and tension and pressure is kind of what make plants better. But plants will respond to environmental things by making constituents, and it might be terpenes, right? So they might isoprene stuff up, it might be flavonoids, it might be other things, but they're responding to stuff in their environment. So these are it's like they're cytokines, right? So flavonoids and terpenes and things are like plants' immune system. It's how they defend themselves. It's how they repair themselves. It's all that. Now, the cool thing is once we really know this, we're just sort of playing around here. I wouldn't say I know everything I need to know here. Most people don't. But as we begin to really understand this, we should be able to understand what a plant is doing to respond to some environmental cue that's also hurting us, and we should be able to take that flavonoid and help ourselves in the same way.
That's why plant medicine, people think that plants randomly make these molecules that somehow magically affect no, they're designed to work on their own bodies, or they're designed to work on the bodies of other organisms. Caffeine, for example, has two functions, at least. One, very similar to THC acid, when the coffee bean falls to the floor of the forest in the natural setting, not on the coffee farm, but that caffeine washes into the soil and it inhibits competing vegetation. But plants don't make molecules for one purpose. They'll also put a little bit of caffeine into the flowers, and
Mhm.
guess what? The bees love it and the pollinating insects love it. So plants will not make molecules for one purpose, nor do they make blends for multitudes of purposes. There was before we run out of time, how can people find you, Chip? How, and or do you have any thoughts on that? But also, how do people find you? What, is there a website we can point folks to?
Yeah, there's actually a couple. So the easiest way to find me is just chiptalkspodcast.com. So, and again, not many people watch that yet. I'm hoping people will in the future. I give away a lot of intellectual property and a lot of information on those podcasts. So come check, find those out. And then day to day, we have a clinic. So, and it's called Neighborly Wellness. Again, neighborlywellness.com. And then we also have my patents help produce a brand called True Medics. And to your point, you can't really patent nature. What I've done is I've built engineering patents. Those patents help, basically, they just describe the thing that I want to create in the endocannabinoid system. And so we're not patenting nature. You can't really do that. But we're engineering with nature, and we can kind of protect what we're doing there. So that's kind of what we're trying to do. But anyway, that's in a brand called True Medics. So truemedics.com. But love to hear from people, and obviously we try to help people with their health every day, do some consulting on health. But what I really want to do is I want to get with a situation and begin to start making some of these drugs. And again, there's a whole intellectual property scheme there, and there's a whole kind of, we already have some drugs, but again, there's other things that I want to kind of develop. But I'm excited to go do that. And I'm ready kind of for that. Now, I'm in a good position right now to go do that. So I'm kind of trying to make that happen. Let's just say.
Love that. I like that you're putting it right out there. If a wise person said to me, if you don't ASK, you don't GET.
Well said. Well
Um,
said.
with the remaining time, any thoughts, comments, questions?
I so much appreciate your mind, and I hope that you continue to do what you're
Oh,
doing
thanks,
on
Chip.
LinkedIn. Oh yeah, because you're providing a service, you're providing information, and the information that you're prompting is, lead would be the word that I'd use, but it might not kind of be in the same spiritual place, but it just feels like you're kind of on the same vibe and path, and
I'm
like
a
we're trying to make this
generalist. I'm a generalist in the age of specialists. So I like to connect the wormholes and the rabbit holes. And I don't see as deeply into them, but I've been through a lot of these places, and I'm a little bit familiar with a lot of the terrain. And also, I speak the language of Rome, but meaning the Latin and the biochemistry and all of that.
Yep.
And so I see the blind spots, and we all have blind spots. I know I do. But I also see immense and tremendous opportunities. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the Sweetwater Holistic Podcast. I'm Dr. Jake Felice, and I'm trying to bring some of the best minds in the health and healing space. So thanks again for listening. Really appreciate you.